Hey everyone, it's Jana from The Last Stitch. What has a stack of post-it notes, a lighter, glue stick and freezer tape in common? Well, these are all household items that you can use for sewing. And in this video I'm going to show you exactly how, plus give you a few more tips on what type of household items that can really elevate your sewing. So let's take a look. Now a stack of post-it note is really useful for sewing, not just for scribbling down stitch settings and things like that during the sewing. What I personally like to use it for is as a sewing guide or a seam guide. You know that when you're hemming maybe a wider hem, it's going to be really hard to get that to keep straight during sewing, especially because most sewing machine just has a small plate where it's measurement. After, if your hem expands, or if you're doing like a decorative stitching, evenly spaced, you're basically left to your own devices because it's going to be really hard to find a sewing guide that works on the actual bed and not just the metal plate. This is where the post-it notes are really handy. So, because there's a glue on the reverse side, so what you do is you put this on the bed of the sewing machine exactly where you want the seam to end. And then you use the edges here to help you guide. This is actually really effective. So if you haven't tried this, I highly recommend that you use it the next time you're struggling with sewing straight. And by the way, if you want to learn more ways to sew straight and other tools you can use, you can definitely check out my video aptly named How to Sew Straight, where I show how to use these and lots of other common items, most that are not something you have to buy, to help you sew straight. And now I'm holding a lighter in my hand because did you know what? That this fire is going to be really helpful for you to figure out what type of fiber content a particular fabric has. Of course, sometimes when you buy fabric, they will be clearly labeled, but sometimes you have no idea what the actual fabric content. And the thing is that when you put a fiber on fire, so to speak, it will behave very differently depending on if it's, say, a cotton fabric, a wool fabric, a synthetic fabric, a rayon fabric, a silk fabric. All have very specific traits when they are set on fire, so to speak. So, for instance, if you are testing this on wool, you're going to get the smell of burnt hair. And if you test it on, say, synthetic, it will actually melt into really hard plastic knot, so you can't really crumble. It's going to be really rigid. And it's also, for instance, if you're testing the fabric that has mixed constant, for instance wool and synthetic, you will get both these things. You will both get the smell of burnt hair, and you will also notice that the melted pieces will become really hard, because that means that these wool fabric also have some synthetic content in it. In any older sewing book at least, and I'm sure you will find many resources online, you will be able to find a guide to each and every fabric, how they behave when they are set on fire. Another instance where the lighter is very helpful is when you are finishing the edges of, say, a ribbon or a tie, and if the tie or ribbon is made of synthetics, because just like I mentioned with how synthetic fibers behave, to avoid fraying, you can actually just graze the edges with the light, and that's going to seal the edges with no need for overcasting them or folding them and stitching them. Just the simple act of melting those edges will be enough to keep the ties or ribbons from fraying. Now, of course, remember that this will only work with synthetic materials, not with cotton and not with wool, so it has to be synthetic. But then again, a lot of ribbons, right, they are made of synthetic fibers these days, so this is where the lighter will be very handy. And another nice household item to use for sewing is freezer tape. Now, a freezer tape is what we call it in Sweden. It's also referred to as masking tape. It has slightly different glue properties, but it's the kind of thing that you either use to label food that you put into the freezer. Sometimes a similar tape is used for masking when you're, say, painting a wall. But the thing is that it's the perfect mix of stickability, but without ruining the material. It's very easy to remove. And why use it for sewing, you wonder then? Well, if you're like me, and have sometimes a struggle to keep myself organized during sewing, this is where the tape will be very, very handy. I will give you one example. For instance, if I'm cutting fabric that looks quite similar on the right side and the wrong side, especially if the fabric is dark, it's going to be a real struggle later on to figure out which side goes where. So what I do is that I just tear a little piece of this tape, I write a scribble on R for right, and then I put it on the right side as soon as I've cut the fabric on both sides, on both pieces. So I know that which is the right side very, very easily when I'm doing the project later on. Another useful thing is, say if you have similar pieces, like panels for a garment that are not identical but very similar, it's going to be a real struggle if you start sewing later on to figure out which piece goes where. Again, this is where you use this. As soon as you cut the pieces, you mark them, say that this is the right panel or the left panel or the upper panel or the downer, whatever words that will help you keep your sewing process easy and reduce the risk of mistake. Because trust me, I have done so many crazy stuff because I didn't label the pieces properly. And when I get into sewing, I just lose like focus. So for me, this has been a massive game changer. So I highly recommend that you use this to mark cut pieces in the future. Now, another item that I think is still common in many households, even though we are definitely going more and more digital, is a notepad. And the back of the notepad, as you know, has a quite firm backing, so it's a little bit thicker than regular paper. And keep these and use them for sewing. Wonder why? Well, I'm going to explain this now. My favorite way of utilizing this is to create something called a press template. Now, I don't know if you see this, but this is actually shaped like a jeans back pocket with the seam allowance removed. So it's, as you probably already noticed, if you're trying to do some type of patch pocket or very precise shaping, when ironing, you know how hard it is to get these really sharp corners, if these like jeans pocket, but also round corners on a round patch pocket is actually quite difficult to get even. But if you do this, you cut the finished pocket without the seam allowance, and then you just press in the edges around the shape of this. You'll be absolutely blown away on how precise this will look and how fast it is compared to, say, trying to like gauge and sort of use your eye basically to try to figure out to create both the pockets a similar size. If you use the press template instead, you're going to be absolutely amazed. And if you're curious to see this in action, I highly recommend that you check out my video on how to sew jeans back pockets, because there I show exactly how to use this method. And another thing that can also be really helpful is to use this as the top stitching template when you're sewing the zipper fly stitch, you know, that round top stitching that you use when you're sewing a zipper on pants. Because again, this is going to be the same regardless of what type of pants pattern you're using. So you can just cut this out once at the right width and then just reuse it every time you're top stitching. So you can just trace around that, or you can also actually stick it on the fabric and sew around it. Whatever method you pick, it's such a great way. So keep these firm paper because you're gonna need it in sewing, trust me. And I also want to give a shout out to the glue stick. Again, this is a game changer, not a lifesaver maybe, but it's definitely have made a great impact in my sewing life. And using a regular glue stick, like not colored, just pure washable glue, this is going to be so helpful when you are struggling to get fabric pieces to stick. For instance, if you're sewing a tricky hem, or maybe you're trying to get a patch pocket to stay on during top stitching, then bring out your best friend, the glue stick. Now, of course, you need to test this on a fabric and wash it and see that all the remains are removed. I cannot guarantee you that this will work, but I have had really great results using this kind of regular glue stick for this particular purpose. It's like a basting glue, but you can actually get it pretty much anywhere. You can also, of course, get one of these. This is the Sewline basting pen. It's also great and water soluble. But if you don't have access to that, just get regular glue stick to keep that tricky hem or that tricky pocket or whatever your detail you're struggling with, I think you're gonna love this. And now, since I'm recording this video during holiday, maybe you will be gifted with some nice bonbons in this kind of beautiful metal tins. Then they're really, really pretty, and they can also be very helpful for organizing your sewing stuff, right? So in this bonbon box, I have my Wonder Clips, which is a great option to pin. These tiny little clips you use to keep fabric pieces in place during sewing. They're very easy to remove. If you're curious about Wonder Clips, I will link to that product in the description section of this video. And you can also use these nice little boxes to help you organize your particular sewing project. So for instance, if you're doing something that requires different type of threads, different type of needles, for instance, if you're doing jeans, you will need both heavy thread, a regular sewing needle and a denim needle, different colors for the bobbin. All of a sudden, everything will be spread out everywhere and you have no idea where it all went. But if you use one of these little boxes, that can actually be very helpful at the start of your project. Here you have all the bobbins full of thread, you have the regular needle thread, you have the needles, any type of other common tools that you will need during the sewing assembly process. Just put this in the tin, and as soon as you're done with it, just drop it here instead of just throwing it away. I guess it sounds silly to say throwing it away, but sometimes it feels like I'm able to throw things on the other side of the room. I have no idea what happened because I'm so in the process. So I have such a struggle still to keep myself organized during the sewing. I just get in the moment and I lose all the kind of skills to keep organized. So that's why having one of these tins to organize my sewing stuff has been a real game changer. Plus it's super cute as well, right? You have these kind of cute lids as well. So yeah, really, really nice. Highly recommend these. So, and if you don't get any nice bonbons, well, why not treat yourself? Because you won't just get some nice candy, you will also prettify and help you organize your sewing space. So these were some of my favorite household items. Of course, there are a ton more, and I've done videos about this topic in the past, which I will link to. And I'm sure that you also have lots of suggestions on things that you use for sewing that we might not think are an obvious choice. So please drop those suggestions in the comment section so that we can all learn from each other. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I talk to you soon. Bye bye!